Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable on raising the next generation of LARPers, LARP Summer Camp, and the future of LARP Summer Camp. My name is Ben Schwartz. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm joined by an enormous array of panelists up here. And we will be talking to you all about our various LARP Summer Camps and how more LARP Summer Camps can come into being, where our LARP Summer Camps came from, what our LARP Summer Camps do, why they do the things they do, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk for about 50 minutes to an hour, and then we will open it up to questions. And I hope every single one of you has at least like 4 or 5 questions, because you just gotta, there's only a few of you, but you're going to make up for it with how many incredibly insightful questions you're all going to ask. So, for starters, we're going to do some introductions. We'll start from that end and work our way this way, and if you can please introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, and the camp or camps you work for and with.
My name is Corinne MacDonald. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here with the Wayfinder Experience Summer Camps.
I'm Trine Boode-Petersen, she, her pronouns, and I'm also here with Wayfinder. I'm Sadia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm also here with Wayfinder.
I'm Andrew, he, him pronouns. I am not here with Wayfinder. I'd like to be that. And I work with the Texas 4-H camp.
I'm Gardner, and I'm with Guard Up Inc. We run Wizards and Warriors Camp and Zombie Summer Camp. There's STEM-based summer camps, and whatever pronouns you want.
I'm Elizabeth Fein, she, her pronouns. I did some wonderful work with Wayfinder about 10 years ago on camps for kids and teens on the autism spectrum, and have been sort of trying to continue and carry that work forward in various places ever since then. Right now in Pittsburgh.
And I'm Ben Schwartz, also originally with the Wayfinder Experience, have also been with Trackers Earth and Magical Prep Summer Camps. So, we have representatives from various camps up here. One of the things that I want to start with is where these camps came from, because camps do not entirely magically spring into being. And one of the goals that we want to foster is the idea that there are not that many LARP summer camps in the world right now, and it would be really cool if there were more. Because we all think LARP Summer Camp is awesome, and every kid should have the opportunity and chance to go to it. But we all only have so many slots at our summer camp, we're only in very specific places. So, where did these camps come from?
So Wayfinder actually, in the mid-'80s, 2 gentlemen at the Omega Institute decided to run a week-long adventure for kids at Omega Family Week. And it was so much fun that they decided to do it again and again. And finally, there was a request that they started their branching out to more weeks and not just at Omega. And as these things do, because of financial reasons and people moving on in their lives, that company folded, and the staff, including myself, just couldn't bear to watch it die. And so in 2001, Wayfinder Experience was started by a plucky group of 18 to 22-year-olds who thought that 33 owners and a work-share environment would make a company that would thrive. And it did, for a time. And about 6 years ago, Trine, a long-term director and hiring manager, and myself pitched to take over the company as sole owners and bought out the other owners, and now run Wayfinder in primarily upstate New York, although mid-state, Hudson Valley area.
Hudson Valley, and then like dabble in classes in New York City, and we'll travel for events sometimes further.
So the camp that I work with is it's the Texas 4-H Center. It's smack dab in the middle of Texas. And it's not, if you asked them, they wouldn't say it's a LARP camp. I just tricked them a little bit. So it's technically owned by Texas A&M University. So it's like a public institution, kind of. And they essentially, my role is a little different, I guess, than some of the other people, but they came to our department and said that they wanted to essentially elevate the camp experience that they offer. And asked if we had any ideas, and so we came in. We just started this last summer, and so we went into the camp and helped them create what we called, for them, we just called it like new immersive worlds for their camp, using themes and narratives and props and other things. So we just started that last year, but they were super thrilled about it, and we had really good experiences and hope to continue working with them in future summers.
Our camp started back in 2001 out of desire to create a camp for my own daughters, really, who were raised, instead of just reading them stories at night, I would make up a story where they were the heroes in the story. And I'd ask them, what do you do now? And then they'd tell me. And so it was just kind of a role play. And I used it to see where they were in their development. And I realized that this was a very powerful tool for kids. And so I had gone to a Larp and I hired a bunch of educators there. And it grew, and Keith is actually one of my wonderful educators. And today we have an overnight camp that brings in kids from all over the world. And we have a day camp as well. And then I have just been contracted by the Princeton Review to set up a series of STEM and story-based summer camps throughout Asia. So I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time in Asia, hopefully over the next few years. And that's kind of where that's not my program, by the way, I should say. It's work for hire. So it's not our Wizards and Warriors camp, it's their own camp, and it's based on a trip to Mars.
So my recollection of how the ASPE camps got started, and you folks who were around in the early days can jump in if I'm misremembering any of it, but my sense is that it started out of a recognition among some of the Wayfinder folks that kids on the spectrum had a really strong positive response to a lot of the camps and a lot of the activities, really getting into character and finding the experience personally and socially transformative, but that they would get sometimes overwhelmed by the sleepaway camps, which were big and socially intensive and not always super structured. And so the idea was to create a more intensive, kind of higher staff ratio day camp for the kids on the autism spectrum. And so this was in collaboration with a local community center that was working with folks on the spectrum, but taking a kind of a unique, maybe not unique, but especially at that time, pretty progressive stance towards people on the spectrum, trying to build autistic culture and autistic community and build a sense of personal pride and self-advocacy among kids on the spectrum. So a lot of the kids coming into this camp already knew each other, had worked together, had had some time, opportunities to kind of learn how to be in community with each other and advocate for their own needs, but also respect other people's needs. And it seemed like it was that kind of alchemy of those two groups that was the birth of the ASPE camps.
Cool. So, EduLarp is a big topic, LARPing with youth is a big topic, but we're not talking about the whole of that topic. We're just talking about summer camp. So what makes summer camp special? What makes summer camp distinct from school year programming, from after-school programming, from other kinds of LARPing and other kinds of EduLarping? What is it about the summer camp environment that is specifically distinct from other forms of LARPing with youth? Start work our way down.
Sure. I think the big thing, the big boon of summer camp is that the kids want to be there. You don't have to work for the buy-in of their attendance and presence. They're already there because they want to be there. And so everybody's on the same page about let's build fun together, as opposed to having to convince them that what you're doing is not going to be torture and that it is going to be fun and like working from there.
Yeah, the other big thing, especially at overnights, is you build in, you have so much time together, and for Wayfinders specifically, we don't have as much time in-game as some other LARP environments. So we build a lot of very strong community and strong friendships, and I think everyone kind of knows summer camps equal friendships, but we find that a lot of the friends that our campers make are lifelong friends that they really can rely on and make really deep personal connections with. So I think that the community is really strong at a day camp and is really special.
I think that the environment of summer camp often feels very different. I find that it can be really transformative for kids. Like they open up a lot more. They're in an environment with a large number of their peers that they often don't know that isn't school. And that doesn't happen very many other places. And I think that the way that kids interact socially with each other is really different. And also the ways that you can connect with them as an adult and mentor figure in that environment where you're not there to like specifically teach them is really different. I don't know. Yeah, it's a really great space for community building.
Yeah, just to build on what's already been said, it's just out of the ordinary, right? I mean, kids spend most of the year at their home or at school, and so they're in a novel environment. I don't want to generalize, but I think that most kids don't spend heaps of time in nature now. And so the fact that they're in nature, right? They're outside of their room, they're away from electrical plugs and their screens, and they're having novel experiences with novel people that they may have known from last year, but generally a whole new group of people that allows them to be in a space where they can, I don't know, express themselves in different ways and do different things than they're used to. Build new competencies, fail forward, right? They've got these counselors that are there who aren't their parents or their teachers, who are maybe a little closer in age than some of their normal mentors or adults. They might feel a little safer failing in those situations or trying new things. I think those are some of the things that makes summer camp magical.
In the comparison, you provided two examples, which is the difference between a LARP or school. And to address those, how we're different than a school, and speaking as an educational LARP, we have a lot more liberty on how we're going to explore education. It's very much then student-driven as opposed to test-driven. We're not having to measure our outcomes, and so we're responding to the desire of the children as opposed to trying to cram a curriculum down their throat. On the other side of the LARP, how are we different? We are first and foremost a summer camp that uses LARP. So by that I mean we are regulated, we are licensed, we are there for the safety and the welfare of the children first and foremost. This is not about entertainment above all else. In fact, we have our code of conduct is safe, fun, then educational. But safe leads everything. So especially, I don't know if anybody else is running in the state of Massachusetts, but we just had a total overwrite of the CMR codes, and they are pretty impressive. So it's getting through all the coding, all the regulations, and it's quite a business to undertake a summer camp in this state and in other states. So if you want to go down that route, please research it heavily before doing so, or you will be caught at it and possibly shut down.
I think something else about summer camps which can be beneficial and also limiting is that people have all sorts of fantasies about what they are and what they're going to be like. You know, people have this vision of the summer camp as this wonderful romantic place where you do this or you do that. And that can be really liberating for people. It can energize people's engagement in the space. But I've also run into a lot of folks who say, this isn't summer camp, you're not fishing, you know, you don't have a swimming hole, you don't have, you know, these kinds of sports or those kinds of sports, or you're not outdoors in these ways. And so, you know, working with the expectations that people have, but also challenging some of the expectations that people have. And Andrew, when you were talking about counselors, I was also thinking about how summer camps are multi-generational in that the campers are having this experience of being in this alternative space away from the spaces and times and regulations of their daily lives, but often the counselors are too. You know, that it takes a certain kind of person and a certain kind of life to be able to take a summer and go and do something different. And I think the relationships between two generations of people who are both having these kinds of extraordinary experiences, I think can be really powerful.
Cool. So Trine, you mentioned that some of the camp is in-game and some is out of game. And Meghan, you mentioned that you're focusing on being a camp first that uses LARP. So how do you balance these things? How do you balance the in-character time and the out-of-character time? How do you balance the camp and the LARP? How do you draw the line, and how do you choose how much of the time at camp is going to be in-game and in character? Trine, do you want to start with that one? We'll start working our way down this way and loop back around.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so we have a pretty set schedule that has been passed down to us from generations that I think just has a good ratio. We try to have a game, and our games usually last anywhere from like 2 to 4 hours. Most times we do kind of one shots. However, we have done up to like 6-part series during a week. Our normal schedule is that we would do a LARP every other night of the camp, and then every other night of the camp that isn't a LARP, we would do some more community building things. We'd have fun dance parties, we would have bardic circles, which for us are sitting around a campfire and having a low stakes environment to share songs and stories and performances with each other. And most of our schedule is working on skills that help in the LARP environment and then building deeper formed relationships for that LARP environment. So we get really in depth with our backgrounds and our characters and all that kind of stuff, and we don't release any information about the LARPs beforehand. So all the LARP is done in community. All the character development is done in community, usually for about a day to a day and a half before our first in-game session. We do improv skills, we do sword fighting skills, we do community and team building. What am I missing? We do so much stuff.
We did a lot of like silly play. A
Yeah.
lot of like the very first day of Wayfinder is breaking the nervous, like
Yeah.
first timer hesitancy.
Especially with teenagers who are so self-conscious sometimes, and they really need to just get into this new, relaxed play environment.
So we do a lot of what are called new games, non-competitive, silly games that don't have a purpose other than like helping you learn each other's names and then just being silly in a group of people so that you set a new norm where there isn't a social construct of trying to one-up or be perceived as together or better, that everybody is on a level playing field.
Yeah, and then we make sure that the day after, so if we do a night LARP of 3 or 4 hours, the day after we'll always have a debrief in the morning before we start working on our next LARP. Especially at our advanced camp, where we do like 3 very different worlds with very different tones that can be very extreme emotionally for certain participants. So yeah, we find that as long as we're like doing a nice debrief the next day, every other day for a few hours is really great because we play really hard. We're not like in character all the time, or it's not like any moment we could all of a sudden have an event happening, because I know some camps function like that, and we actually do that with our tiniest children. We have a camp that's 6 to 8-year-olds, and for them, we're always in character, we're always playing. We do all the same workshops, but at any moment, story attacks the camp, and it's a lot of fun. So it kind of depends on the age range, how much we balance.
Yeah, I don't have anything, like, that's the schedule I use too. I guess I think that it's a really good system that actually, like, I've been talking about implementing more in adult LARP, is having literally like 4 to 5 hours of play every 2 days that you're together. Because those 4 to 5 hours of play are so intense and immersive, and no one's breaking character casually. There's nothing. It's like that amount of time and skill building and trust building lets people play so much harder, and that limited game time lets them play intensely and immersively and not get worn out on it.
So what we did was very different, because it was still very traditional summer camp. We still did like fishing and rivalry and all these traditional summer camp experiences. Because like I said, we were still kind of tricking the camp staff without actually telling them what we were doing. So we didn't use words like on game and off game with the kids as much. It was more so during each of these core 8 activities, they were on game, they were in the story, they were participating, they were using different voices and props and other things, and then when they were going in between activities or participating in like the other nightly rituals, they were off game. So we just chose to I guess, wrap the narrative around the core activities that they would do each day. But as we move forward, it's interesting to hear, because as we move forward, like this upcoming year, we want to start helping them create characters and create more immersive roles for themselves, I guess, and think of a more overarching narrative that we can keep and kind of be more intentional, I guess, about having like 3 or 4 hours of in-game and then being off-game and doing other things.
So our story goes year-round, because we have a year-round facility as well as a summer camp. So for Wizards of Warrior Camp, we study a culture, and we hire a cultural educator from that culture. So last year, our emphasis was Native American with tribes, the tribes of the Arawak and Abenaki. And we had cultural educators from those tribes on staff who helped us to write the plots, who approved all the props and costumes, how the stories were portrayed. They had absolute control over everything that we portrayed about their stories. So we explored their stories all through the summer and the previous year. So we have a Day of the Dead celebration held at our facility, and it was a Day of the Dead, their version. So how do they celebrate death in their culture? And then Vernal Equinox, which is how do they celebrate life? And so our stories are all based in this culture. For the zombie camp, it's a piece of literature. So we usually dystopic literature, because zombies. So what we do is the entire summer, the summer, at the end of the summer, we hook the culture or story for the following year. And then that following year, all throughout the school year, spring break, summer break, full day adventures, we're exploring that culture or that story. And then when camp begins, many of the kids who go to the camp, not all, participate in our year-round adventures. So they're already familiar with the culture, they've already been to the library, they've already been doing their research. And they come in with their characters who they've been playing year-round. And they're kind of mentoring the new kids who are coming in. And so we have full-day adventures. We go 9 to 3, right after breakfast we start up, 9 to 1. We do our stories, they break into groups called houses. So it's smaller groups with a better ratio. And they travel around the acreage and work with different encounters. And each encounter may be modified slightly to the group that's coming to them, especially depending upon the age group. And then they gather at lunchtime, everyone has lunchtime together. And then 1 to 3, we have adventure. And at 3 o'clock, the day campers leave. Snack time for the overnight campers. And in the evening, it's a little more flexible, a little more summer campy with, we have, fire pits, which are little electric fireplaces, and we put them in the dorm rooms and they can gather around and talk about the stories. We try to do debriefs inside the game with our archetypes. So if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's work, we base a lot of our concepts and our education around cultures on his work. And so they interact with archetypes who question them about things. And one of the archetypes is actually the library. And the library is a sacred space where the kids come in, they have to leave their weapons outside. And they have to talk about the transfer, what we call transfer, which is what's happening inside of this game and what are you going to do with that when you leave here in the rest of your life. So, so this goes for pretty much the whole summer. And then at the end of the summer, we hook for the next culture. And the kids are very excited about it. And a lot of them will go off and read and research and learn more about that culture, essentially to do better at the game. But what we're trying to do is bring the world's cultures to the kids. So this year's Bulgarian myths and legends. And then I think it's going to be India next year. That's one of the areas in India.
Yeah, in the Aspie camps, the setting was somewhat similar. We do these week-long modules, 2 weeks with the younger kids, 2 weeks with two weeks first with the older teens, then 2 weeks with younger kids. And the older teens stayed around and were CITs for the younger kids, at least some of them were. And so would generally be like the first couple of days were workshopping, learning the magic system, getting into character, doing some of these improv exercises, new games, and then developing characters, learning the story world, do something like a scavenger hunt in character, and then do the game, usually just in a couple of hours in one day. And so something about the Asperger campers is that they were often really in character, kind of all the time. Like they would be walking around doing like accents for their character's accent, or sort of doing things like their character would do. So the line between being in and out of character was sometimes a little bit fuzzy for them. And so it helped, I think, to have some activities where you could practice going in and out of character in a slightly more low-key, fluid way. So we would do like character interviews where, everybody's all sitting around together and you're just yourself, but then you go up there and you're sitting there and then you have to answer these questions in character, and then you go and you sit back down and you're yourself. Or the scavenger hunt where you could start to be your character for a short period of time and then step back out of it. And so I think that having that experience of going in and out slightly more casually, but still in a kind of formalized way, I think was helpful for them, both in terms of learning what it's like to see the world from different perspectives, and okay, here I'm me, and now I'm somebody else, what's different, what's similar, and then also, providing a little bit of containment for them so that they could kind of learn how to regulate that.
No, I feel like that really covered it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
All right.
go.
So then the next thing I want to talk about is you've mentioned several times counselors and staff. So sometimes these come from inside the community, and it's a generational thing. Sometimes you are training people who maybe have never LARPed before, and in fact do not know they are LARPing. You are tricking them into it. Sometimes you're working with experienced professional facilitators. How do you find your staff, and how do you teach them? How do you train them? It is always a transitional point. Being a counselor, as you mentioned, is often very much just as intense an experience as being a camper. So how do you help facilitate that transitional process of going from participant to teacher, or outsider to teacher, or being someone who creates this world? Is there someone who feels called to start? You want to keep going down the side?
We can keep going down the line. Wayfinder has very much a culture of bringing up people within the community, and I actually do feel like I have an interesting position within Wayfinder because I wasn't really a camper before joining the staff. So I ended up kind of spending one summer in a volunteer role to learn the skills that most of the people who want to work as Wayfinder staff learn as staff in training when they're still campers. And then joining the staff role afterwards through that. I do really like the culture, though, of bringing people up and stuff, and I think even in the past few years, I've seen more people coming in from outside, too.
Yeah, we have had more people coming in from outside, and one thing we do that's required by our insurance, but also a great thing to do, is having a really in-depth training program. We actually choose to do a whole week, like 5 days, where we pay for room and board, but we can't unfortunately pay our people to be there for the week, but room and board's pretty good. And we have a really in-depth schedule where we go over training. Because it is a Larp camp and not another summer camp, we have a lot of different departments that some summer camps might not have. So we go into in-depth training on costuming people, how to build sets and props, how to counsel children post, pre, and all around Larp situations, running workshops, all kinds of stuff. So I think that really helps. And then, yeah, as Sadia was saying, we have a very good mentorship program for campers who are already in the community. We have an SIT program for overnight that starts at 16. And that's just
SIT means staff and training.
Yeah. Staff and training program where they are partnered up with one staff for a week and learn skills directly from them and can ask them any questions they want and get to really do hands-on work.
Yeah. I usually am training SITs in the costuming department, is like where I work for a lot of Wayfinder. And it's a really great program because it's like, they still get to go do some camp activities, but like the staff really works with them to schedule like what camp activities do you really want to go be at and what time can you spend here learning our organizational systems, or like learning how to hand sew and fix costumes, or like learning how to costume a PC group.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really great because it's like very hands-on. It's like giving them responsibilities to make the game happen with like oversight and help from a staff member.
So because I don't actually work for the camp that does the camp, I know they do like a whole week-long training type experience, but I only did one day of training for them that kind of focused on the LARP aspects of what we did. And all of our counselors are college students that were just recruited, so they go to the surrounding universities to recruit for the job. And so what we did is, and they're all non-LARPers, non-theater, they're just people that want to work at something. So what we did that was a little bit different is that we had them create the narrative and the new immersive world essentially for the camp. So we asked them what they thought would be good. We kind of came to a decision all together as a group, and then we broke them off into their own activity groups, and then they spent time in their activity groups discussing how they might build a narrative around their activity. And we specifically used narrative storyboarding to help them do that. So we essentially said, here's the activity of like archery, for example. And then we broke it up into different categories like here's the arrival experience, here's the orientation experience, here's the actual activity, here's the debrief, here's the exit, etc. And then we had them kind of outline for the arrival experience, what's your narrative, what characters are going to be involved, what role will the campers play, what props do you need, et cetera, et cetera. And so for each of those sections, we essentially kind of had them build out their narrative. And for people who had never been involved in something like this before, I think it worked pretty well. They were able to I don't know, they didn't struggle with it really, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And they were able to build these pretty cohesive narratives on their own, even though it was their first time. And then we role-played it, of course. But we had them practice on each other, give each other feedback, and then kind of reiterate and prototype again. But that's kind of how we did our training. It was lighter in nature, because we didn't really do anything too immersive and too in-depth, so we didn't have lots of like debriefing and other things like that, but that's the way we did it.
So ours is a week-long training. It includes CPR and first aid training for all staff, as well as basic child group management instruction. And then we have curriculum counselors who are responsible for the curriculum and how to integrate that into the story. Our approach to LARP is a little bit different. We have an overarching story that we release on the first day, and then we respond to the children. So we write the next day's plots that night, according to what the children did. It's a long night. Sometimes making props and this man can speak to it. Sometimes making the props and costumes for the next day that night, because that's how responsive to the children that we want to be. This is their adventure. They're literally directing the story. Without that, we feel that there's not enough of a sense of agency, because that's the one thing these kids lack in school. There's some mild amount of autonomy, but I should give you my definitions on those. Autonomy is the ability to, make your own decisions, but agency is, do you affect the outcome of the story? Can you actually change the outcome of the story? And that's what we allow. We leave that rather open-ended for them. So the idea of plot writing is dedicated to a plot writing team. We have a logistics center that's run by logistics specialists. So our staff coming in, we're looking for teachers and educators, for people with a lot of experience working with kids first and foremost. I don't care if they've never LARPed, honestly. I can teach you how to play pretend because you all knew how to do it at some point. So the key thing, again, I'll say, is the safety, making sure that the kids are emotionally and physically safe. And then we play pretend and we go with the education aspect of it. So we hire predominantly professionals who have the summer off. And then also we do have a CIT program that helps us bring the kids up through, but we don't hire them until they're 20 years of age, because we want a very significant gap between the counselors and the kids who are the oldest campers, if you will. But they can also be part of the training program at our facility. And that's the only time we might hire junior counselors, is if they've gone through our junior training staff year-round. So they have substantial year-round experience that they've already been training in before they are hired as a junior counselor at our facility.
It's been really interesting for me to hear the range of approaches to this question of how much previous experience do you need with LARPing, with gaming. From my experience, it's like I'm always looking for people who have that background, who have been running D&D games since they were a little kid, or who have been, doing an improvisational theater, who have been building game structures and game worlds, who have immersed themselves in the process of creating and co-creating stories, because that's not an experience I really had. That's something that I came to much later in life. And so I have a lot of respect for the people who have that expertise and have kind of cultivated it over many, many, many years of work, but also play and things that span both of those realms. So for me, I'm always kind of on the lookout for collaborators who have those gifts and those skills that I can add to my own background. And I'm a clinical psychologist and anthropologist, so my own background in working with folks on the spectrum and working clinically with individuals and then trying to create groups. I'm interested in people who have experience using story and game to create community.
So you touched on the idea that, or do you want to go back to you, Corinne?
Please.
Yes, take it away.
So one of the things that we talked about is how Wayfinder is actually probably 98% former campers that have come up through the Wayfinder program, which means that they already know our systems for play, how we use our buffer weapons, how we use magic to enhance the world, the kind of storyful telling that we want. So a lot of the training that goes into specifically our SIT staff and training and staff is about creating healthy boundaries and how to step into new power dynamics with people who just last week were their peers. And what it means to now be somebody who is holding a safe space for people who are maybe only a year or 2 years younger than you, and the responsibilities that come with that. There's a lot of behaviors that become inappropriate, and it's a very nuanced thing. So we spend a lot of time actually dealing with that and addressing it because it can be messy. And it can be messy even if you weren't close friends to play roles in an adventure game that is immersive and deeply emotional, and you have all this bleed, and then you have to also be the person that's making sure that this minor is being safe. Or, you know, if you're staff in training, making sure that the campers feel like you have their back and are approachable, but also not being inappropriate, which is sometimes, especially as a teenager, a hard thing to gauge, because a lot of the play in social, like teenage interactions can be inappropriate humor and interactions. So that's something that we consciously address.
Same with our hiring. We always make sure that the staff who's teaching the SIT isn't just 1 year above them, because we're probably peers really recently, so we try to make sure in all of our hiring that they're getting trained by someone who wasn't necessarily in their peer group.
And one of the things that just is hard, the hardest thing to do is to go from a culture of playing adventure games and getting so much out of it for yourself and really playing and immersing yourself so fully that you lose sense of who you are, which is awesome, and everybody wants that. But when you are then a staff member in the game and playing a role, the ability to snap out if an emergency situation comes up, if somebody is having a bad time, being able to recognize that and pull yourself out of your character arc, help that person reintegrate or get to a safe space and then continue playing. And that's a hard thing to get people used to.
Can I just build off that quickly?
Please,
Because I wanted
please.
to, one of the things that I thought was amazing about the Aspie camps was the way that these teenagers spent first 2 weeks as campers, and then in the second 2 weeks stepping up into this role as mentors. And it was so hard for them. Like looking back, I'm like, that may have been too much to ask, but I think it was also a really powerful experience for them, even though everyone on the staff spent a lot of time. We spent more time managing the CITs, I think, than managing the campers. Because it was so hard for them to see the people they had been. To look at these kids and see them all over the place and wild and dysregulated and just saying whatever came into their minds and crying when they got upset. And they were sort of judgmental, like, you can't be doing that stuff, because they had really learned, but it was still, I think, a little raw for them. So they would get very upset when the kids misbehaved. So I think giving them the space that they needed to process their own feelings about other people's kid behaviors, I think was particularly important in helping them become the mentors that they needed to be and that they could be.
So in a couple of those answers, the idea of Larp skills came up. The idea that you can teach people how to play pretend, that learning these skills to sort of integrate and reintegrate narratives is important. But we also talked a lot about education. So how do we specifically teach Larp skills? How do we train kids to be better Larpers, or kids and adults and counselors? What are the Larp skills that you emphasize? Are there tools you use to help improve the play and have the play be productive? Andrew, you're next, and then next in
Can I
sequencing.
think first? I don't know a lot of Larp skills. So.
Yeah,
All right, Megan, you take it away. You look
Can you
like
actually clarify a little more about what you mean by it's a very nebulous term?
It sure is. So in this case, I'm talking about skills that are specifically relevant to the play. So whether that is being in character, whether that is helping facilitate narratives for other players, whether that is finding tools for steering your own storyline, things like that. Tools that are specifically LARP relevant skills.
So, since we don't steer the story, the kids do?
Sure.
I'm gonna
So
have
the
a-
kids to steer the story.
Yeah, so
That
I'm
is a
gonna have a
skill.
little different, probably different
Absolutely.
approach on that. But really, we're looking to create a safe environment for the kids, first and foremost, and then let them do what they want. So there's some kids who are gonna really come in and just play themselves. That's okay. They come in with a character that sounds really different, but actually it's an aspect of themselves that they want to play with and put out there, and then turn and blame their mistakes on that character. And that's okay. We are not really looking to tell the kids how to play pretend as long as it's safe. So there will be kids who come in and interpret their own character's background way outside of our rule system. And that's all right. They can't use the powers they claim they have. And we'll call them on that. But if they want to say they have them, that's okay. We're really much more about creating more of a sandbox mentality as opposed to, because the idea of this is the world is called Terra. And the idea is that it's the crossroads of all myth and literature and history. So at any time throughout our world, you can intersect with a character or a creature out of history, myth, or literature. And so they are defining for themselves what kind of character they are when they want to interact with them, with these beings. So if they want to come in as a character from a totally mythical world that they made up, that's okay. Our characters are defined. Theirs are we're a lot more loose and open with. I don't want to put too much rigidity around what they can and can't do with their character as long as it's safe.
So then, to turn the question, what are the tools you use to help them find safe play?
Yeah, so that's a discussion. It's about what, in each group, in each house, they often discuss what is appropriate in that house. How do they express themselves appropriately? And there are, the camp hug, which is the side hug. You don't want to have it. And so personal space, pronouns and the preferred pronouns. So there's a lot of discussion around that and what's appropriate for them. But I think that's often used in most academic type settings, any type of settings that they've been in. So for a lot of these kids, that's not new to them. We're just reinforcing it. And then we have skill tokens, which are these minted coins that we give them when we catch them doing it right. So
That's what I was looking for.
yeah,
There we go.
so when they, if they're helping another child, or if they are going out of their way to solve something, or a lot of times it's when they're helping other people, they can earn a skill token. And those skill tokens are what you need, along with your ability to know the curriculum in order to power up in the game. So, so you collect skill tokens, and then you go to the guild, and then you learn the skills from the mentor, and then you have to teach the skills to the other kids. And then you get your extra power. So, but for some kids, that's not even a motivator. So we're not leaning just on that. So I guess we kind of go with it.
Something that's come up a lot for me in the programs that I've worked on is, a lot of the kids, teens, players on the spectrum are very, very into the game aspect of things. They're very into the structure of the game. They're very into the rules of the game, to getting the points, working the spells, that kind of thing. But a lot of them also have differences in how they process information. So having to remember a whole lot of game rules, or having to do a whole bunch of complicated calculations on the fly. Some of them are going to be able to do some of that, others are going to be able to do other parts of that, but there's not a lot of consistency in what everybody's able to kind of do in terms of the mathy stuff. So something that I found really helpful are people who have a really good sense of game design. Somebody who's got a sense of how do you build a game system that is just complicated enough without being too complicated, that has a lot of fixed qualities to it, but also has some flexibility, that encourages people to create balanced characters and accept that a good game means you have strengths and weaknesses, which is also an important lesson to learn about life. And so being able to design a system like that, I think, is something that is a skill that some people are intuitively very good at, but I think also takes a lot of learning.
So Wayfinder once again benefits from having primarily a culture that is created over 5 to 8 years before people become staff. But once you become staff, the things that you do in an adventure game that is considered good play is different. So a lot of the training goes into campers, and we do a lot of improv work, specifically just like improv games to get people ready to say yes and, to make their partners in scenes look good, to make sure that they can help build instead of just saying yes and not engaging. Our catchphrase is go with the flow. Something happens in an adventure game and you're not sure if it's supposed to be happening or not, go with it. Let's see, like what happens. So a lot of times at our staff training, when teaching people how to take on what we call SPC roles, they're not quite NPCs, story playing characters, people who are still playing characters, who are still engaging, still getting play, but are there to help guide or create containers in the adventure. Some of the helpful things to do is, the prince of the neighboring nation who has come on this envoy is going to be played by a camper. Very clearly, we're going to give the prince role to a camper.
Yeah.
So the royal advisor is played by me. And when Theodore is unsure about what to do next, Theodore can choose to consult me. Theodore can make a decision, and I can give support or caution and help make sure that Theodore is then also addressing his loyal guards who are there and have their own strengths and things to give. It's about facilitating connection, because what we do is one-shots. People don't level up characters. They don't invest in a character. They invest in scenes and experiences so that the takeaway is an emotional feeling, is a great story to tell later, as opposed to something that they build over many games and experiences.
Yeah, so at our staff training week, we do a specific SBC training class, or like a monster class. Like, here's what's going to happen when you meet with a game writer before the game, what they're going to ask of you. Here's what we expect of you when you're playing a monster in a wood or some other kind of SPC. So we go over that pretty clear in our trainings. And another thing is, we, as far as like specific like Larp skills, like we have a very unique brand of game writing, and I think people learn it from playing it and then trying to write their own. And so we have an elaborate storyboard where literally our campers and our staff members, all like the same, submit to these 5 people on the storyboard, and they read all of their games. And the way they get better at that particular skill is by getting feedback from this awesome volunteer board about how their game works into our system, if it's a good match, if it needs certain tweaks. And then when they get a game written, we have a lot of SITs or even campers who are game writers. And so they're paired with staff who can hand them the tools on how to run a game, how to run a story workshop to get people excited about building characters for that game. Yeah, those are like some of the really, I think, good tools that we do well.
I like this. I just want you to
What?
say it.
Oh, well, this is before I answer the question fully. My note says, Larp skills equal life skills. Because I wasn't thinking about skills just for Larps, but I was thinking,
Talk about that.
I mean, sure. So, like, one of the things that I really liked, I don't remember your name, Meghan, that Meghan said was that, how are we going to bring this out in the world? And that's something we do too on our last day in our closing circle for the week. We talk about, like, being more confident now that you have learned this improv and gone through a game where you saved the world. How can you bring that confidence out in the world with you? Like this community where we're all really deep, trusting pets, how can you share that and spread that out in the world? So a lot of the skills we're teaching are just good people life, how to enjoy life and be a good person skills. So that's why I really like.
Well, like life skills, listening to people when
Yeah.
they speak. And you can do that as an antagonist, and you can do that as somebody who is playing a helpful character. There are a lot of ways to listen to people and let them know that they've been heard in an adventure game. And so practicing that skill in the lead up to the adventure game, I think, then lets people feel comfortable already in saying yes to people and listening and helping this collaborative process.
When I think about like what LARP skills we teach the kids, we do a lot of workshops. The other thing is kids are better at LARPing than most adults, 100%. I have so many better scenes with these kids at camp than I have with adults in game regularly. Kids are used to playing pretend. Teens, they've only stopped doing it for a couple years usually, and like once they get over being embarrassed, get back into it. And everything, they're not jaded about the stories we're telling. Things are still new and exciting. So like, really a lot of what we do is support that, rather than teach them how to do something they don't already know how to do. I think the like most helpful skill we teach them as far as playing in a LARP is how to have conflict collaboratively. Where we have games where kids are in opposing factions with opposing goals, and only one faction is going to come out on top of that game. And how do you have that conflict and still come out of that game winning or losing and still being friends with the person on the other side and still feeling like you had a good story and still feeling like the other side who beat you worked with you for the whole game. And I think it's a really important, like that's like the most important life skill that I think we teach. And it's also a really, really important LARP skill that I don't necessarily see other places, is how to compete while still keeping that other person's happiness and like satisfaction in mind.
Because we're just playing with our friends.
We're just playing with our friends, and like how to try to win without stomping on someone else is, I think, like a really important skill. Like you can fight really hard and try really hard to win and still be respectful of the other person's efforts.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
So we kind of have a motto among our campers, it's about you. And then you become CIT, it's not always about you. And then you become staff, it's never about you.
I like that.
So it's our CITs, we have our CITs as playing the antagonists. We don't have our campers versus campers. We want them to band together always to go up against whatever the big bad is or the opponents. So so we don't generally have any of that factions, although we create our own houses. And they do have their own little ribbing that they do with each other. But we don't have more of that kind of competitive environment of camper versus camper in our campus.
Andrew, do you want to jump in?
I have decided that we do not teach LARP skills. But I know for next year, all of the LARP skills to teach.
So my last very important question before I hand it over to audience questions, where do you find kids? How do you do your outreach? How do you advertise? How do you make sure you're reaching a wide variety of kids and giving them access to camp? How, what, do? Megan, do you want to start this one and we'll loop back around?
Sure. I'd say the two dominant are the website and word of mouth. Also, it helps. We had NPR do an article on us that definitely helped. And Joseph Campbell Foundation came out, was really interested in what we're doing. They did a write-up, so teachers found us, and then the teachers started sending us campers. So it's basically, I think it's just this interesting kind of networking in part, and then also the press get a hold of what you're doing, they're like, what's this? and they find some interest in it. But even above and beyond all that, the campers bringing their friends. That's number one.
I've never been involved in that part of the process, so I probably don't have a whole lot to add other than that if you're looking for folks on the spectrum, a lot of times there are programs or services particularly for that group, and often these folks are very public about what their deep interests are, and so if you get the information around that we're doing a camp that's themed on X, Y, and Z, and they know somebody who's super into X, Y, and Z, they may connect that person to the program based on what their interest is.
Short answer is the struggle is real. Everything that Megan said, absolutely. The biggest is word of mouth and campers telling their friends. It's really helpful if you can get in and do spring break programs at schools, because then you get like a 3 or 4 day program to demo what you do. Kids get excited and then they want to do it in the summer.
We personally run promotional events, like monthly events that are for community building, but also for people to bring their friends to early so they can know they want to do it that summer before they book their summers up with something else.
Marketing for summer camps is very tricky. It's very different. You need to market to the participants, the children and teens, so that they're interested, because their interest is going to pique the interest of a parent, and then you need to market to parents. So like it's, in our experience, it's not enough to put a picture of a super awesome looking costume and sword kid like on a pamphlet. You also need to make sure that there are children smiling and beaming their excitement, so that parents are like, oh, yeah, I just want my kid to be happy. So you're marketing to two very different groups, and remembering that at the end of the day, you're serving the participants and giving them the experience, but the money is coming from parents and guardians.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried it all. We've done AdWords, print advertising, Facebook advertising, like so many things. The biggest thing is still word of mouth.
Yeah.
And like funneling people at your website every way possible.
Gaming stores. Put all of your literature in gaming stores. Find the nerd children where they lie and bring them to you. It's really.
So for the camp that we worked with, it's like a state, like 4-H. Is everyone familiar with 4-H? Like 4-H is everywhere. I feel like, I don't really know. I'm not very familiar with 4-H. But I'm pretty sure it's everywhere. But they just use mostly like listserv. I mean, they just push stuff out to their people. We did use a lot of Facebook advertising actually, just because we did something so radically new this last year, and that brought a lot of people. But the camp itself is pretty small, and frankly, I think gets full regardless of what we did. But we used Facebook advertising.
That's getting harder to do, by the way, with all the new guidelines coming out.
Oh yeah.
So just be aware that if you see your Facebook advertising plummeting, it's probably all the new standards they're releasing.
One last thing. The economy has shifted a lot. I'm sure, Megan, you remember like pre-2008 and post-2008.
I opened my doors 3 days after 9/11.
Yeah.
So I know.
I
know how the fight is.
It's a totally different economy, and summer camp is a luxury item. But you're dealing with kids, so the real trick is to convince parents of the very real takeaways. You know, why do they come to your camp, which they have a lot of fun at, instead of having a lot of fun at band camp where they learn how to play an instrument? Why do they come to your camp instead of going to baseball camp where they have a lot of fun and learn a sport that maybe they could get a scholarship to get into school with? You know, that you have to be very clear about what the takeaways are. We all have a lot of feelings. Larp builds better people and creates empathy and teaches people how to understand and talk to each other and be inquisitive. Those are the things you need to tell parents and be ready to spend something like 75% of your time having long conversations with parents.
Yes.
Because it's their babies, and you are going to caretake them and do this very weird thing that some of them don't understand, and you're going to walk them through it.
I could add another thing. And I really want to emphasize on what you said about it being, it's all about the parents, really.
Yeah.
You show any kind of kid wearing a costume with a foam soda or Nerf blaster, you're going to get them at your camp if they had control over the checkbook. But they don't.
Yes.
No matter, even when we do have the occasional child who calls up with their parents' credit card in hand and the parent doesn't know. Is that a laugh of knowledge?
Yes!
Okay. All right, so along with what you say, and I agree, 75% of our time is the parents. And we say camp begins when the parents leave. Because it's amazingly difficult. And by the way, we don't do things. There are people who have camps where it's like they will upload your kids' photos just so you can see how they're doing, essentially nanny camming it. We don't do that. We don't allow kids to bring their phones into camp. They have to leave them with the nurse. We don't want the kids saying, I'm having a bad 1 hour.
That's a really important thing that everybody should hear
Yeah.
about it also.
So when you go to run this, I promise you, like she said, 75% of your time will be dedicated to the parents. 25% will be running the camp. So it's going to be a lot about helping the parents feel at ease, and that's going to be a lot of your website dedicated to how safe what you're doing is.
So we can talk about parent management strategies for an hour, but do you want to have at least a little bit of time for audience questions? Alexis?
I have so many questions, but I think the one that most interests me because of the keynote that we just had about parasite versus pillar, and I think it would be really interesting to talk about that in the context of summer camps. You know, there's not that many Larp summer camps, but the summer camp industry is massive. There's a huge competition for kids and what to do with summertime. So I'm wondering, what do you think about this organizer's dilemma between summer camps? How can we support one another in the camps we run, cooperate, and be generous with our time, our financial resources, and our praise?
My initial thoughts are partnering, respecting each other's regional boundaries. Summer camps pull regionally, and it can be really helpful to be like, there's this awesome thing near you in Massachusetts that it sounds like would be much better for your child who does not want to travel 4 hours and stay with strangers at a sleepaway. And just being able to collaborate in those ways, but also we offer different things.
Yeah.
Not all LARPs are built equally, and not all LARPs are for every person, and being able to communicate and know the different things that are happening in different camps so that you can direct people when it's appropriate. Trackers functions only on the West Coast, but we have a lot of crossover with staff, or Wayfinder does, and last year we did a survival LARP camp, and brought in some tracker staff who had also worked with us
and
to
like
treat
some of the training that they specifically use, or knife safety and other safety things.
So collaborate, and become a nonprofit and apply for grants, because what you're doing is awesome and different, and there is money out there. It's hard to get though, so, but yes.
The other thing is talk about it to adult LARPers. Adult LARPers have kids, and they already know what you're doing. So the chances of them wanting their kids to also LARP, they already know the value of LARP. That's why they do it for themselves. And I think that not a lot of them just know that we're out there and exist. So yeah, talk to your adult friends with children who are LARPers.
I think this is a start, which is having a panel like this so that we can talk to each other and talk to people who are interested. I think also, though, to be careful about the limiting term LARP. We don't even use that as our defining part of what we are. We call ourselves story-based education. So there are actually quite a few story-based education, people who use story to educate. And so I think the industry is a lot larger than you think it is. There are a lot of camps out there that are using stories to help to educate. So part of it can be networking outside of the LARPing community to be more involved with educators and see the different and creative ways that they're utilizing something that we would look and go, that's LARP. But they go, what's that? So, so part of it is kind of opening up the doors outside of LARP to be more inclusive of other approaches.
I was wondering if you had any stories of fail or like near fail or like heart attack moments when it's like when you're allowing like CITs to like write a story or something, and like some sort of mechanic like multiplies quickly in a way that you weren't expecting, or like when you're just like trying these different games where you can't really play test them. How do you do that without dying?
So, I mean, there's different ways of failing. Like, you know, we've had to cancel events before because of illustration. We definitely have kids break bones sometimes at camp, and we have really well-trained PMTs on site. And we have a lot of people really going over the adventure games to vet and make sure, and we've had to cut things for
Or like, what
adventures.
sort of things would you cut? Like, what sort of things, like, if I was gonna write something for them?
So I've had kids write game mechanics for different kind of drugs in game that they've added after the fact. Like after the story was chosen and picked, they were then added this cool new game mechanic about like taking a substance that does something crazy to you. And then we get to kid, we go, oh, excuse me, what new mechanic did you add that we don't want our campers to be practicing?
You're not going to
doing that
be
to
pixie
me?
dusting.
Oh, I don't need it to be
No, the first game I ran at Wayfinder was about drugs.
Well, no one's saying. There are ways we experiment with drugs in game. It's when we had a game that didn't have it in the initial submission. Like when we know it's in submission, we know we're playing with it. That's important for teens to learn about and experience in a safe and controlled environment where like we know what the arc is going to be. When someone at a different camp many years later added it suddenly, that was a moment where I felt like I had to step in and be like, no, because that was not the point of this LARP, and you don't know how you're going to handle it in this game. That's not a thing you just throw in. Those are some moments I've had.
Wait, can I talk
Yeah.
about the first game I ran at
Sure.
Wayfinder? Because like it was fun, but it was also a hot mess.
Sure.
As most first ones are.
Yeah, it was the first LARP I had ever written. I had played 2 LARPs when I wrote it, my biggest mistake was not underestimating the death count and not having a good re-mechanic or bringing people back into the game mechanic. With kids, I think it's harder to control death count. I'm better at estimating it now, but I still never feel like, even with I'm running the same game with a different group, I'm never sure it's going to have the same, like, even general range of death count. So having a super strong re-mechanic, knowing how your kids are re-entering play, making sure that's cool and interesting for them, making sure they still have investment is super important if your games involve any kind of death, because kids will find a way to die. They're really good at it.
What is a re-mechanic?
It's when your character dies, it's how you re-enter the game, or like reincarnated. A lot of our games, you come back as a different character. Some of them you come back as the same character. Again, since we do a lot of one-shots, it's very, very setting dependent. But having a mechanic where people can still interact with game after death is super important, because I've seen many games besides just my first game where people are like, it's going to be a low-death game, so if you die, you'll be able to interact in these ways, but you won't come back as a full character. I've seen it go super wrong many times.
It feels like your question was, what are the oh shit moments in game? And I just want to really quickly say, my biggest oh shit moments are everything outside of game.
It's true.
It's the rest of the nightmares, like when you get through your breakfast and everybody's signed in and you realize that there's a camper who didn't sign in and isn't in the bunks and isn't in the bathroom and isn't anywhere, and you start freaking out and organizing a full land search and then realize that the kid was upset, called their mom on their cell phone, didn't tell anybody, and the parent showed up before anybody woke up and picked up the kid outside their bunk and didn't tell anybody. So like, oh shit in game is actually at this point I'm like, whatever.
Because I guess I was thinking of like trying to encourage other camps to include LARP. And
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And like, I worked at a camp before, and we had like a wacky Wednesday, and like I was just bored manning the jail, so I started marking kids. I'm like, oh, I'm the ogre queen, and you know, now you're marked and stuff. And then within 15 minutes, they were kidnapping other kids and bringing them to me, and like all the other counselors are like, what did you do? Like, and I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't know it would like snowball like this. I mean, it was like sort of great, but like everyone was like, whoa, like I don't know if we want them impressing the other students into your army, and I'm like, sorry. So like it's from other people that maybe aren't like just afraid of that.
Okay, yeah.
You know, like encouraging them like what to avoid, I guess. Or
Right. So a lot of that is about writing in safeguards and then also having community expectations outside of the adventure that are understood to carry over. Because teens and all people love to play with taboo issues as a way of exploring them. You're going to find a lot of those crop up, and especially with teens who haven't yet learned to be afraid to like say those things or do those taboo like actions. They will crop up, and I think that if you have built-in strong community trust and have processing options, that actually can be a great moment. When somebody does something that is horribly representational of a group or some atrocity and it's upsetting, that is a great time to have the conversation. It's a huge learning moment for not just the person who made the mistake or had the action, but other people who just witnessed it and didn't even realize that it was possible to upset people that way. So I look at those things as a boon a lot of times.
Jump in very quickly, we're just about out of time.
That was what I was going to say, actually, is managing time is, I think, really hard. If you've got a really intense game, how do you wrap it up in enough time that you then have the time to talk about these things, process these things, work through these things? I think that's, if the story's going to go where a story's going to go, how do you rein it in, hold that space? I think that's tricky.
That's a beautiful segue to the fact that we are just about out of time, but there are a bunch more questions, and conveniently, right after this is lunch. So I encourage everyone to continue these conversations over lunch, find a lovely table, but before we wrap up, I want to pass it down. If each person could give one piece of advice or a thought they have about LARP camps coming into the world or bringing LARP into other camps, a quick, pithy statement.
Kids are resilient and kids are the future. Don't be afraid to ask them to do more than you expect them to be able to, because they will surprise you every time.
You're going to do way more work that's not the fun and joy of LARP than you expected, so make sure to keep finding your joy in it.
Trust your kids and play with your kids. You will, it will be really rewarding if you can have those moments with them.
If you're incorporating LARP into a non-LARP camp, give your counselors and staff the autonomy to make it their own.
Never underestimate the power of parents in both directions.
Trust the love. If a kid's got a passion, a story, an idea that's meaningful to them, there's a really good reason for it.
If you are not an experienced administrator or logistics person, find people who are and pay them money, please. So that is the time we have. Thank you so much to you for being here, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. This was a great conversation.